Hello everyone, this is Miss Ava Hart, and today is Monday, November 30th, 2020, and it is 3:22 p.m. In this video, I'm going to explain to you assignment number one. Assignment number one, you're going to analyze the poem For My People by Margaret Walker. Now, by this time, you should have already watched the video of me reading the poem For My People by Margaret Walker. After you watch the video of me reading the poem For My People by Margaret Walker, which is found on pages 314 and 315 of your textbook, then you are ready to analyze the poem. Okay. So this assignment is worth 18 points. The first question is, what do you think is the author's purpose in writing this poem? Type your response below. Why did Margaret Walker write the poem For My People? What was the purpose? Why did she write it? Number two, who was the subject of this poem? I am a poet. That is what I do naturally. I am gifted as a poet. All poets have reasons why they write poems. Not only do they have reasons for why they write poems, but they also have subjects for their poems. Their poems are for certain people or about certain places or about certain things or about certain events. So, who is the subject of this poem? All right, number three. What is the author's attitude or feeling toward the subject? In literature, this is the literary device tone. You were introduced to tone when we read Letter from Birmingham Jail. Tone is the author's attitude or feelings about a subject. So, what is Margaret Walker's attitude or feeling about the subject that she wrote the poem for, or that the poem is about? Number four. And I moved too fast. So let's go. Let me go back. So number four. For each of the following four sentences, type a line from the poem that supports or matches it. In literature, this is the literary device imagery. So imagery is when a writer writes in such a way that you can taste it, you can touch it, you can feel it, you can see it. That is imagery. A writer or an author is so descriptive with the way they use their words that you can see it, you can touch it, you can taste it, you can smell it, you can hear it. So in this poem, you are to find an example from the poem, write it word for word for each of the four senses. Sound, okay, here are the senses. Sight, sound, touch, and taste. Now let me go back. Here is my example. I chose sound. Do not use my example. Use your own. Please do not plagiarize. Do not use my example. Use your own. So I went to the poem For My People by Margaret Walker, and I found a line from the poem that appeals to my sense of sound. And here's the line. For my people everywhere singing their slave songs. I could imagine hearing people singing slave songs. Songs like Wade in the Water. So I chose that as an example of sound. So that's what you need to do for sight. What line in the poem where Margaret Walker, she wrote it in such a way that you can actually see it. Sound, find a line in the poem where you can actually, she wrote it in such a way that you can hear it, that you can imagine hearing it. Touch, find a line in the poem where she described it in such a way that you could actually, you know how it would feel if you touched it. And then taste. find a line in the poem where she describes it in such a way where you can actually taste it. So taste, touch, sound, and sight. You are to find one line from the poem for each of these 4 senses. And there's 2 points apiece. Look at my example. I quoted word for word from the text, and I even gave you the line number. That's what I expect you to do for sight, sound, touch, and taste. In literature, this is called imagery, where the writer describes things in such a way. It could be a thing, it could be a person, it could be an event. They describe it in such a way that you can see it, you can touch it, you can taste it, you can feel it, you can hear it. All right, number 5, alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words. Here's an example. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. Alliteration, a tongue twister, is just an example of alliteration. If you notice in this example, the consonant S, the consonant sound S is repeated at the beginning of every word. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. So you are to find an example of alliteration in the poem For My People by Margaret Walker, where at the beginning of each word is the same consonant sound. I just want one example. So type an example of alliteration from the poem For My People by Margaret Walker. Number 6 is repetition. Remember I told you when I was talking about letter from Birmingham jail, and I said that writers use literary devices to make their writing more interesting, to give their writing more flavor. In Letter from a Birmingham Jail, the literary device that Dr. King used to make his letter more flavorful was tone. Well, Margaret Walker, to make her poem more flavorful, to give her poem more spice, more kick, to make it more interesting, to make it more alive, she used alliteration and she used repetition. And she also used imagery. All right. So for alliteration, I just want you to find one example of alliteration. Alliteration is when you repeat the same consonant sound at the beginning of every word. In this example, the S, consonant sound of S, is repeated at the beginning of every word. In number 6, repetition. She uses repetition. Repetition is a literary device, and repetition is the use of any element of language, a sound, a word, a phrase, a clause, or a sentence more than once. Here is an example. Nori was a Catholic because her mother was a Catholic, and Nori's mother was a Catholic because her father was a Catholic, and her father was a Catholic because his mother was a Catholic or had been. This excerpt came from Nicholson Baker from The Everlasting Story of Nori. This is an example of repetition because Catholic is repeated 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is an example of repetition because the word Catholic is repeated 6 times. So in the poem For My People by Margaret Walker, you need to find an example of repetition, where there is a word, a phrase, a sentence that is repeated more than one time. And you are to type it right here. All right, that is it for assignment number 1 for the poem For My People by Margaret Walker. Assignment number 1 is that you're just going to analyze the poem. And analyze means that you're just going to pick it apart and look at it in a deeper way. That's what analyze means, is that you just pick it apart and you look at it in a deeper way. All right, so I will see you, or I won't see you, but I will talk to you on the next video.